Hi, I'm Lauren Young. I'm an editor at Reuters, and I am joined here today with Tim Nixon of Constellation Research and Technology. Tim, you've got some new research out, and I would love for you to talk about how you are moving the needle on sustainability and what this all means.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Lauren. At a high level, before we kind of dive into some examples of the data, what I would say about the new research or the new ESG analytics that we're publishing is that they combine for the first time ESG data, which describes a company's degree of disclosure on, say, in a climate context, on the degree of disclosure on emissions, for example. ESG tends to describe policies that companies have and a whole array of other KPIs that you would find in their sustainability reports. And what we've done is we've said, okay, that gives us some insight on where a company might be headed with their sustainability performance. But in order to really understand what's going on with a company holistically, we've also got to ask a series of additional questions. So, for example, in today's sector release on the automotive sector, we ask questions that are related to an automotive company's performance in their products. So, for example, what is the level of performance in terms of grams of CO2 per kilometer traveled in their fleet? What is it today? And what is it projected to be tomorrow? And when you combine that kind of industrial or operational performance data on the actual impact of the products from a company, alongside that ESG view that gives you a little bit higher level view and also a view into their disclosure and their policy making, it allows for, we think, a much deeper level of insight on where the business is going as a whole, both today and forward-looking going forward. So what I'd like to do, Lauren, is just show you an example of what our data output looks like for the automotive sector, because I think it'll help, put some clarity on the words here, if I might.
That sounds great, Tim. Let's go to the slides.
Okay, so here we are. Can you see my table? Okay.
I can.
Okay. So as I mentioned before, what you'll see in this type of an analysis is, first of all, along this left-hand column here, you'll see the list of 27 automobile manufacturers ranked in order of what we call maturity. And how is maturity determined? So maturity is determined by asking a series of questions that essentially represent the pathway that auto sector manufacturers go through as they integrate more and more sustainability or lower carbon innovations into their products and services. So the first stages up at the top and steps within those stages have questions related to whether the company has a policy on climate change. Are they fully reporting their emissions? What kind of a public emissions reduction targets do they have? These are sort of early stage steps that companies go through in the auto sector as they're just sort of getting their feet wet, gathering their courage, if you will, on how to think about transforming their business. And then moving on from there, we get into that operational or industrial type data and questioning. So, what is the current percentage of sales from alternate drive vehicles? Step 7. What's the emissions performance of the fleet? Again, grams per CO2 kilometer. And then even further down the performance ladder into stage 4, we start asking questions around, what is the market share of this company in terms of zero emission vehicles or plug-in hybrid vehicles? And perhaps even most importantly, is this company trending in line with a 2-degree Paris 2 degrees Celsius Paris scenario, so that, at the end of the day here, we're not just comparing these companies with each other. We're also saying, these companies are operating within a series of planetary boundaries. And even if they may be performing well against each other, if they're not performing within planetary boundaries, that's highly relevant to determining their overall maturity score. So that,
There's,
yeah,
I was going to interrupt you for 1 second. There's so
sure.
much here right
Yeah,
now.
yep,
There's a lot
yep,
of information.
yep,
Could you, for the people who are watching, could you
yeah,
break it down a little bit? What does this mean? Is Tesla good? They're
yeah,
number one?
yep, yeah. So at the end of the day, what it means that Tesla's on the top, and these two very interesting China-based mostly electric car makers, BYD and BAIC, Bake. What that means is that those three companies ranked 1, 2, and 3 here are best positioned from a business opportunity perspective. So they have transition opportunity as the world becomes more and more carbon constrained. And what do we mean by carbon constrained? We mean the steady increase in regulation requiring, say, no internal combustion engine vehicles in cities, or even California announced today or yesterday, by 2050, I think it is. It might be earlier anyway. No more internal combustion engines new sales there. So that type of regulatory activity drives the opportunity and transition opportunity for companies that are currently making electric vehicles or are projecting to make electric vehicles. Similarly, investors are looking more and more for companies that have that electrification qualification in their portfolio. And frankly, consumers are also. I mean, we've seen with the COVID pandemic how important demand is from the consumer in driving down emissions. I mean, we saw a huge drop in global emissions at the onset of the pandemic. And similarly, as customers began to expect, healthier emitting vehicles, lower cost vehicles, I think increasingly the consumer lever, in addition to investors and regulators, are going to drive that, what we call sustainability premium, or the transition opportunity that the companies ranked toward the top of this list will continue to harvest.
Who should be using this information and how should they be using it?
Yeah. So to answer that question, let me go to another view of the data, and it's a little bit more detail on this question of who is positioned in this list with the most opportunity going forward or the most risk. And in order to not just be able to talk about this, but to actually be able to measure it at a company level, which is crucially important, we think, we developed something called the sustainable value ratio. And what the sustainable value ratio does is it places a bunch of variables that help to define opportunity in the numerator, and a bunch of variables that help to define risk in the denominator. So what does an opportunity variable look like? Well, if we look down here under the opportunity list here, transition opportunity metrics, we see things like the level of market leadership in zero emission vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles. What are they projecting going forward for alternate drive vehicles? What's their momentum, number 4, on grams per CO2 per kilometer? So in other words, over time, are they actually declining in their emissions across their fleet? Are they aligned with the 2-degree pathway scenario? And similarly, on the risk side, what is their current fleet emissions, total grams per CO2 emitted? Do they have governance structures that are aligned with that align compensation with improving sustainability performance? How transparent are they? Geo risk. This is a brand new metric that we're launching that helps to define the level of risk a company has with higher emitting vehicles in markets that are becoming increasingly regulated. And finally, SUV intensity. One of the main findings of the report that we've just put out with Refinitiv is that over the last decade, there was a very significant increase in the number of SUVs as a percentage of the total sales of cars and trucks that entered into use. And that increasing level of SUV use actually, after the energy industry, was the largest contributor to global emissions increase over the last decade. So imagine that. People buying SUVs and instead of cars had that much of an impact. So just to step back, if you put all of these variables on opportunity and risk in a numerator and in a denominator, and you do the math, what you end up with is a sustainable value ratio that allows you to quantify, how ready is this company to capture that opportunity, or how exposed to that risk is that company going forward into the next decade.
Got it. And then I'm curious for you,
Yeah.
as we're looking at all of this, what does it mean? I mean, how can somebody translate this and use it for the opportunity and risk?
Yeah. So that gets to your question too around, well, who's going to use this stuff? and so one of the things that we were able to do after creating a sustainable value ratio metric, which you see here in this chart, in the very middle column there, is we can then ask questions like, well, is there some sort of an alignment that we're seeing with companies that, according to us, are better positioned to capture opportunity going forward in terms of total shareholder return? In other words, are investors already rewarding these companies for that transition opportunity that that they may be seeing in their business models? And interestingly, when you start to look at the results, we do see some evidence here. It's a very small sample size, but we do see evidence that for the first sort of third or highest grouping in terms of sustainable value, an outperformance on shareholder return, and similarly, the middle group outperforms the bottom group. So to answer your question in part, when you have analytics that provide a level of insight that gets into, is this company able to produce products and services now and going forward that have less climate impact? When you're able to answer that question, you can then provide data like this and analysis like this to investors, and similarly to policymakers and even to journalists, Lauren, who might have an interest in well, why is Subaru number 23?
I know, I drive a Subaru, so I'm very sad to see that.
Yeah. I didn't want to see that either. My parents both drive Subarus, and I thought, oh, geez, this is not what I.
We're a 4 Subaru family. I'm not happy about that. I'm going to call them after this is done. So Tim, I know we're getting close to the end of our time here, and you have, I think, some other information you want to share with everybody who is joining us today. What else is important to know here in terms of your data, your research, and what's next, and COVID for that matter?
So thanks for asking that. I mean, I think what we're most excited about is that this is really our first release of this type of ESG data and analytics. There's 14 new metrics here that we've developed and launched just for the auto sector. This will continue to be updated on a monthly basis as new operational and industrial data becomes available for these companies, and then in turn available to Reuters as our partner and other consumers of the data. But really, what's most exciting to me is that we're already working on utilities, and then oil and gas will follow shortly after utilities towards the end of this year and early next year. So then, we'll have a view of really the 3 most important sectors that are critical to understand in terms of climate and climate mitigation. So I'm really excited about the future, especially in the next few months as we bring this new level of insight to the marketplace.
That's great, Tim. Were there any surprises here when you actually crunched all the numbers together? Did anything really stand out to you?
Yeah, Subaru was a surprise to me. It took me a while to accept that. VW was also a surprise. VW is 4th here, and it's a very interesting company because it's 4th because it's extremely aggressive in its projections for transforming itself, and it's also a bit fraught with risk in a sense because they don't currently have a lot of capacity and expertise in producing electric vehicles. So it's a really interesting example of a company with enormous capability, operating in a highly regulated environment, putting basically everything on the table in terms of its transformation, but not a lot of actual demonstrated capacity to build the cars they say they're going to make. And having that kind of insight on a massive car maker like VW, I didn't expect to see that. I didn't expect to see that kind of a risk profile, for that particular company.
Excellent. Tim, I want to thank you for your time. I want to wish you the best of luck with your future research. I'm looking forward to seeing what you have next. And on behalf of Reuters, I'm Lauren Young. Thanks again.
Thanks very much, Lauren. Great to be with you.